The conference room felt colder than usual. I stood before my boss, clutching the presentation I'd spent weeks perfecting. He didn't even glance at it. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, "We're making some changes. You're being let go." Confused silence filled the air. Before I could process it, his nephew strolled in with a grin and took the empty chair beside him. "Tyler will be taking over your position," my boss added casually, as if I was just being replaced by a spare part. Around the table, no one said a word. I felt the humiliation burning my cheeks as I gathered my files. Tyler smirked, running his hand along the edge of the conference table like he already owned it. I didn't cry, not yet, but the shock left me trembling. My hands shook as I stacked papers that suddenly meant nothing. 6 years of late nights, saved projects, and loyalty reduced to this moment. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the only sound besides my racing heartbeat. I walked out of the building under escort, head held high despite the weight in my chest. Outside, I watched my reflection in the glass doors fade as security locked them behind me. My boss fired me to make room for his nephew. The words looped in my head like static. Inside my car, the tears finally fell, rage and disbelief mixing with betrayal. I'd given everything to that job. Now I had nothing but a box of memories and the echo of laughter from people I once trusted. The security guard who'd escorted me out had looked away, embarrassed. He'd seen me come in early, stay late, work through holidays. And now he'd watched me leave in disgrace. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The parking lot was half empty, the sun too bright for what felt like the darkest moment of my life. I sat there for 20 minutes before I could move, before I could breathe without feeling like my chest would crack open. Weeks later, as I rewound the events in my mind, the memory of every late night and every time I was overlooked hit harder. Flashbacks blurred with reality. The time I corrected my boss's error in front of the board and watched his jaw tighten. The day I stayed past midnight to save a failing project while he took credit the next morning. The morning I found Tyler sitting at my desk, feet up, "Just testing the chair," he'd said with that same smirk. "The pieces fit now." They'd planned this. My boss had been grooming his nephew for months, slowly sidelining me while I worked myself into exhaustion. Every compliment had been hollow, every promise empty. The realization didn't just sting. It burned. But somewhere beneath the anger, something else formed. Something cold and patient. They thought I was finished. They thought wrong. I started keeping notes, writing down every detail I could remember. Dates, projects, conversations. Not for revenge, not yet. Just so I wouldn't forget. I spent the next month applying everywhere. Rejection emails piled up. One interviewer smiled politely and said, "You're overqualified." I knew what that meant. They thought I was desperate, damaged goods from a sudden firing. Rent loomed. Pride shrank. My savings account dwindled week by week. I stopped going out, stopped answering calls from old colleagues who wanted gossip more than they wanted to help. But even as my savings drained, something inside me hardened. I would never give anyone that power over me again. Never again would I build someone else's empire while they held the keys. Late at night, I'd lie awake and see Tyler's smirk, hear my boss's casual dismissal. The humiliation should have crushed me. Instead, it forged something stronger. I didn't know what yet, but I knew I wouldn't stay down. I'd clawed my way up from nothing once before. I could do it again. And this time, I'd do it differently. A small consulting gig fell into my lap, through an old client from my previous firm who needed help untangling a logistics mess. She remembered my work, remembered that I delivered. I took the job, working from my kitchen table with a cracked laptop and determination I didn't know I still had. 3 weeks later, her revenue jumped 30%. She sent a thank you email with 3 referrals attached. Word spread. One success led to another. Small companies, desperate companies, companies that couldn't afford to waste money on consultants who didn't deliver. They needed results, and I gave them results. No social media posts, no noise, just work that spoke for itself. My bank account slowly climbed back from the edge. I started sleeping better. Not well, but better. Each project felt like proof that I wasn't what they'd tried to make me believe I was. I wasn't disposable. I wasn't a placeholder. I was good at what I did, and people were starting to remember that. My reputation grew faster than I expected. A regional firm hired me to restructure their operations. The CEO, a woman named Patricia, shook my hand and said, "We've heard about your precision. That's rare." For the first time since my firing, I felt seen for my competence, not dismissed because of politics or nepotism. Patricia treated me like a professional, listened to my recommendations, and implemented them without second-guessing. Within 2 months, their efficiency increased by 40%. She offered me a permanent position, but I declined. Something had shifted in me. I didn't want to work for someone else anymore, to build their dream while mine sat dormant. I wanted to build something lasting, something mine. Patricia understood. "When you're ready to go bigger," she said, "call me. I invest in people who know what they're doing." I left her office with a business card and the first real smile I'd worn in months. The world felt wider suddenly, full of possibilities I hadn't seen before. Late one night, scrolling through industry news, I froze. My old company was in trouble. Missed contracts, falling stock, whispers of poor management spreading through trade publications. I almost laughed. Karma doesn't miss, I muttered to the empty room. But instead of celebrating, I opened a spreadsheet and began analyzing their publicly available numbers. Weak points, debt structures, leadership instability. Every note went into a folder labeled future opportunities. My hands moved quickly, muscle memory from years of doing this exact work for them. Only now I was doing it for myself. The company's third-quarter report showed declining margins, delayed deliveries, and a footnote about restructuring leadership roles. Tyler's disaster was playing out in real time, documented in neat columns of red ink. I stayed up until 3 a.m, mapping their decline. Not out of spite, though that was there too, but because I saw something they didn't. Potential. Value buried under incompetence. A company that could be saved by someone who actually knew what they were doing. Months later, a former coworker named Vincent called me in secret. "You wouldn't believe what's happening," he said, voice low like he was afraid someone would overhear. "Tyler messed up a major deal with our biggest client. Half the team's quitting." I listened silently, taking notes. Vincent had always been decent, one of the few who'd looked uncomfortable when they fired me. "Your old boss is trying to cover it up," he continued. "But the board's asking questions. Some of us remember how things worked when you were here." I thanked him and hung up. My revenge wouldn't be loud or angry. It would be surgical. I opened my laptop and pulled up the folder I'd been building. The picture was clearer now. The company was bleeding talent, losing clients, drowning in debt. Tyler and my old boss had accumulated trying to look successful. They'd wanted to play empire. Now the empire was crumbling, and they had no idea how to stop it. But I did. My consultancy, now growing, caught the attention of a retired venture capitalist named Warren. He was in his 60s, sharp-eyed and soft-spoken, the kind of man who'd made his fortune by seeing value where others saw risk. "Ever thought about investing instead of just fixing?" he asked over coffee. I hesitated, then said yes. The word felt dangerous and right at the same time. We partnered to form a holding group that acquired undervalued firms with potential, companies just like the one that had discarded me. Warren brought capital and connections. I brought analysis and operational expertise. Together, we were formidable. Our first acquisition was a small manufacturing firm drowning in debt, but sitting on valuable patents. Within 6 months, we'd turned it profitable. The second was a logistics company with terrible management and excellent infrastructure. We cleaned house, installed competent leadership, and watched it thrive. Each success built my confidence and our capital. And with every deal, I learned more about how to take a company apart and put it back together. Skills I would need soon. Meanwhile, Tyler's arrogance deepened. I heard through Vincent that he was in over his head, but too proud to admit it. My old boss defended him publicly, while investors panicked privately. The company's stock continued its slow slide. Articles appeared in trade publications, politely brutal, asking whether leadership changes were coming. I watched the meltdown from afar, patient as gravity. Warren noticed my attention. "You're tracking something," he said. It wasn't a question. I showed him my folder, now thick with reports and analysis. He studied the numbers, then looked at me. "This is personal." I nodded. "Does that matter?" He smiled. "Not if the numbers work." And these numbers work. We started building a position, quietly buying shares through shell companies and third-party brokers. Nothing illegal, nothing flashy. Just steady accumulation while the price dropped. The long game was just beginning, and I had time. I'd learned patience the hard way. Now I would use it like a weapon. At an industry summit 6 months later, I ran into my former HR manager. Her name was Beatrice, and she looked worn out, guilt written all over her face. She'd been the one to walk me out that day, apologetic but ultimately complicit. "Things haven't been right since you left," she murmured, glancing around like someone might overhear. I smiled softly. They made their choices, I replied, walking away before sentiment softened my edge. I had no room for guilt or forgiveness yet. The summit was full of people I used to know, colleagues who'd watched me get fired and said nothing. Some avoided me. Others offered awkward greetings. I returned with professional coolness. But I also met new people who knew my work reputation and nothing about my firing. To them, I was just a rising consultant with an impressive track record. That felt better than any apology. By the end of the summit, I had 3 new client leads and confirmation that my old company was in worse shape than even Vincent knew. My firm landed a contract that directly overlapped with my old company's client base. Instead of competing openly, I offered a strategic partnership through my holding company. They agreed instantly, desperate to stabilize their declining revenue. None of them realized who was behind it. The partnership gave me access to their internal operations, their client relationships, their vulnerabilities. Every meeting provided new intelligence. Tyler attended one video call, cocky and underprepared, spouting buzzwords he clearly didn't understand. I stayed off camera, listed as a senior analyst, watching him fumble through questions he should have anticipated. My old boss was there too, looking older, tired. He kept checking his phone, distracted. The company was dying around them, and they were too proud or too blind to see it. After the call, Warren looked at me. They have no idea who you are. I shook my head. Not yet. But they will. The pieces were almost in place. Soon, very soon, it would be time to move. As I reviewed acquisition reports at midnight, the numbers aligned perfectly. Within weeks, my holding company would own the majority of their shares. Every document was clean, every step legal. Warren's lawyers had reviewed everything twice. We'd followed every regulation, filed every form, maintained every disclosure requirement. When I closed the laptop, I whispered to the dark room, almost time. My heart raced, not with anxiety but with anticipation. 2 years. It had taken 2 years of grinding work, careful planning, and patient accumulation. 2 years since they'd thrown me away like garbage. Now I held their future in my hands. I poured a glass of water and stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Tyler was probably sleeping peacefully, thinking himself secure. My old boss probably believed he'd weathered the storm. They had no idea the storm was just beginning. And unlike them, I knew exactly what I was doing. Tomorrow, the lawyers would finalize the last share purchase. After that, there would be no going back. Tyler bragged to investors about new funding saving their company, not understanding that the funding was a noose tightening. Behind the scenes, layoffs began to stop the bleeding. Morale collapsed. Vincent sent me a text. This place is falling apart. People are jumping ship. When the final transfer cleared, my lawyer sent 2 words, "You're in." I stared at the message for a long moment, then exhaled. The weight of it settled over me. I now owned 53% of the company that had fired me. Majority shareholder. Controlling interest. The power to reshape everything. Warren called immediately. How does it feel? I searched for the right word. Surreal, I finally said. He laughed. Give it a day. Then it'll feel like justice. That night I didn't celebrate. I sat in my apartment and thought about every person still working there, people like Vincent who'd stuck it out, who deserved better than Tyler's incompetence. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about fixing what they'd broken. But first, there would be a reckoning. The board summoned a meeting to welcome the mysterious majority investor. I walked in wearing my best suit, heels sharp against the marble. Silence rippled across the room as I entered. Tyler's grin vanished. My old boss looked like he'd seen a ghost. I slid my briefcase onto the table and sat at the head, the seat traditionally reserved for the CEO. I hear you've been busy, I said, voice steady. The tension was so thick I could taste it. My old boss found his voice first. What are you doing here? I smiled. I own 53% of this company. Where else would I be? Tyler's face went from pale to red. That's impossible. We would have known if... I cut him off. If you'd been paying attention instead of playing executive? Yes, you would have. But you weren't. So you didn't. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder. Shall we discuss the state of the company you've been running into the ground? The tension thickened as I explained the acquisition trail, every transaction legitimate, every share accounted for. I looked them in the eye. 2 years ago, you replaced competence with convenience, I said. Now convenience has cost you everything. My old boss shifted in his seat, trying to recover his authority. This is highly irregular. The board should have been informed. The board was informed, I interrupted. Every SEC filing was public. Every disclosure made. You just didn't notice because you were too busy covering for your nephew's mistakes. Tyler panicked, his voice rising. This is some kind of revenge scheme. Probably illegal. Insider trading or something. I stayed calm, presenting a neat stack of contracts, timestamps, and NDAs. You might want to check the clauses you signed before lying further, I said quietly. The other board members, 3 people I'd never met, looked between us with growing understanding. One of them, an older woman, spoke up. Let's see the documentation. I slid copies across the table. Every purchase clean. Every price fair market value. Everything legal. The room went silent as they reviewed the papers. The board voted. Both Tyler and my old boss were suspended pending review. Tyler stood up, knocking his chair back. You can't do this. This company is family. This company is a business, I said, cutting him off. And businesses require competence. You'll be hearing from the auditors. My old boss didn't fight. He just stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time, really seeing me. Then he stood and walked out. Tyler followed, still sputtering threats about lawyers. When they were gone, the board chair turned to me. What's your plan? I pulled out another folder, this one thick. Full operational audit. Leadership restructure. Client outreach and retention program. We have 60 days to stop the bleeding before the damage is permanent. She nodded slowly. And you're qualified to run this? I smiled. I built half of what works here. I know every system, every client relationship, every revenue stream. The question isn't whether I'm qualified. The question is why you ever thought he was. By the end of the meeting, I had temporary control and a mandate to fix everything they'd broken. During the internal audit, the truth surfaced like bodies after a flood. Misused funds, false reports, nepotistic hires that had nothing to do with talent. Tyler's name appeared on unauthorized transfers. Money shifted to consulting firms that didn't exist. My old boss had signed off on everything, either complicit or criminally negligent. I didn't have to say a word. The evidence did it for me. The board removed them permanently, with cause which meant no golden parachutes, no severance packages. Just the door and whatever dignity they could scrape together. I watched the announcement go out from my temporary office. Former office, really. Same desk, same view, different nameplate. Vincent knocked on my door. Is it true? They're really gone. I nodded. They're gone. He smiled, a real smile. Good. This place has a chance now. I hoped he was right. I'd won, but winning was just the beginning. Now came the hard part, actually fixing everything. My first morning as CEO felt unreal. The same security guard who'd escorted me out 2 years ago now opened the door and said, "Welcome back, ma'am." His eyes met mine, and I saw respect there, maybe even a little awe. I walked the halls slowly, not to gloat but to remember. The office smelled of new beginnings mixed with old coffee. Familiar and foreign at the same time. People watched me pass, some nervous, some hopeful. I stopped at my old desk, the one Tyler had sat in. Someone had already cleared his things out. The chair was the same. The view hadn't changed. But everything else had. I stood there for a moment, remembering the person I'd been when I worked here before. Younger, more naive, believing that hard work alone was enough. Now I knew better. Hard work mattered, but so did ownership. So did control. I turned away from the desk and headed to the executive suite. I had a company to save. I met with department heads and reinstated fair policies. No one gets promoted by bloodline here, I said in my first all-hands meeting. No one gets fired to make room for someone's relative. Competence matters. Results matter. That's how we move forward. The applause was small but heartfelt. People were scared, uncertain what my leadership meant. But I also saw relief in their faces. Relief that the chaos was over. I outlined my 90-day plan. Stabilize client relationships, review all contracts, audit financial practices, and restore operational integrity. It was aggressive, maybe too aggressive, but we didn't have time for slow. Several people approached me after the meeting. One was a junior analyst who said, "I'm glad you're back." Things were bad. I thanked her and meant it. For the first time, the company felt human again, not like a machine running on fear and favoritism. That night, I worked until 11, building schedules and priorities. The work was enormous, but I'd done enormous before. An anxious HR manager stepped into my office later that week. Beatrice, the same woman I'd seen at the summit. "I never forgot what they did to you," she said, voice shaking slightly. I wanted to help, but I was scared I'd lose my job too. I'm sorry. I studied her for a moment. She looked genuinely remorseful, tears in her eyes. I could have held her complicity against her. Part of me wanted to. But I also remembered what it felt like to be powerless in a system designed to protect the powerful. I know, I said finally. What matters is what we do now. My grace disarmed her. She nodded, wiping her eyes. What do you need from me? We spent the next hour rebuilding HR policies. Fair hiring practices. Clear promotion criteria. Whistleblower protections. Everything that should have been there before. Beatrice took notes like her life depended on it. When she left, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, exactly, but something close. Justice didn't have to mean cruelty. Sometimes it just meant making things right. A forgotten payroll issue resurfaced the following week. Unpaid bonuses from 3 years ago, buried in accounting by Tyler to make budget numbers look better. I approved every check personally, including for people who'd stayed silent when I was fired. We fix things here, I told the finance team. Some people deserved the money. Others didn't. But paying everyone sent a message. This company operated on principle now, not politics. The word spread fast. People started believing that change was real, that I meant what I said. Productivity increased. Client calls went smoother. Small wins accumulated. Vincent stopped by my office with coffee. You know what people are saying? He asked. They're saying this feels like a real company again. I smiled. That was exactly what I wanted. Not revenge, not domination. Just competence rewarded and systems that worked. Tyler and my old boss had treated this place like their personal kingdom. I was treating it like what it was. A business built by people who deserved better than what they'd gotten. Weeks later, Tyler appeared in the lobby, disheveled and desperate. He'd been escorted out by security after his termination, but now he was back, asking the receptionist to see me. Security called my office. I told them to let him up. He entered my office looking nothing like the smirking nephew who'd taken my job. His confidence was gone, replaced by desperation. I need a letter of recommendation, he said. No one will hire me without one. Just something basic. I studied him for a long moment, remembering every smirk, every condescending comment, every moment he'd sat in my chair like he'd earned it. Then I slid a sealed envelope across the desk. You'll find all the references you need, I said softly. He grabbed it, hopeful, and left. I knew what was inside, his own termination file. Copies of the financial irregularities, the falsified reports, the unauthorized transfers. Everything that made him unemployable. Not revenge, just truth. He'd built his own reputation. I was just documenting it. My former boss sent an email weeks later, short and uncertain. I underestimated you. I'm sorry. I stared at it for a long time, reading between the lines. He wasn't sorry for firing me. He was sorry he'd lost. Sorry his gamble on nepotism had cost him everything. I didn't reply. Instead, I filed it away and moved on. Forgiveness wasn't required for closure. The company continued its recovery. Stock prices stabilized, then climbed. Clients who'd left started coming back. New contracts were signed. The board approved a 5-year plan I'd built, aggressive but achievable. Vincent was promoted to VP of Operations. Beatrice restructured HR into something functional. People who'd survived Tyler's chaos finally had room to breathe and grow. I worked long hours, but good hours. Building instead of fixing. Creating instead of surviving. Some nights, I'd sit in my office after everyone left and look out at the city. The same view Tyler had stared at, thinking himself untouchable. The same view my old boss had enjoyed while destroying what others built. Now it was mine, earned not given. Months later, the company thrived under my leadership. Investors returned. Employees were proud again. The building hummed with purpose. I stood in the boardroom one morning as sunlight poured through the glass walls, preparing for a quarterly review that would show record growth. 2 years ago, I'd left the same room in tears, humiliated and discarded. Now every seat waited for my command. I looked out at the skyline and smiled, remembering that younger version of myself who'd thought hard work was enough, who'd believed loyalty mattered more than leverage. She'd been wrong, but she'd learned. I picked up the gavel and whispered to the empty room. They said I didn't fit their future. Then louder, stronger. Turns out I became it. The board members filed in, greeting me with respect that had nothing to do with bloodline and everything to do with results. As I called the meeting to order, I added one final thought, more to myself than anyone else. Funny how tables turn, especially when you own the table. And I did. Every chair, every decision, every future success. All mine, built from the ashes of being thrown away. They'd tried to erase me. Instead, they'd forged me into exactly what I needed to become. Someone who would never be erased again.